Have you ever sat at your kitchen table, coffee gone cold, and thought to yourself, how did I become invisible? Not in a dramatic way, not in anger, just in that quiet, aching kind of way where you realize you give and give and give, but when you need something, the room is suddenly empty. It's a strange and lonely place to be, especially when you've spent your whole life being there for everyone else, especially after 60, when you expected the world to slow down a little with you, to come back to you, to recognize all the care you've poured into your family, your friends, your community. But instead, what you feel is a growing distance, calls that come less often, plans made without asking you, advice brushed off with a smile and a quick, okay. Mom? Or, we've got it. Dad. You start to wonder, have I done too much? Or maybe, not enough. But the truth, the one no one talks about, is this: sometimes being generous becomes a habit so deeply rooted that people stop noticing it. And when they stop noticing it, they stop appreciating it. They start expecting it. Worse, they start assuming you'll always be there, quietly waiting in the wings, ready to help, to listen, to give even when no one asks how you're really doing. It's a heartbreaking place to find yourself. But it's not a place you have to stay, because there's a way out of that invisible role. Not through yelling, not through guilt, not even through confrontation, but through the slow, powerful practice of reclaiming yourself. There's a story I often think about, a man named Harold. He was 72, a retired builder, and the kind of man who never said no. His children leaned on him for everything: rides for the grandkids, handyman help, extra money, emotional support when their lives got messy, and Harold gave freely, gladly, at first. But one day, he stood on a ladder fixing a leak in his daughter's roof, and something in his back seized. He fell, thankfully not badly, but he sat there on the ground for a long time, not just from the pain, but from the realization, no one asked if I was up for this, not even me. That moment stayed with him, because for the first time in years, Harold asked himself what he needed, and it wasn't another thankless errand. It was rest. It was respect. It was to feel seen again. So he made a decision, small, but firm. The next time one of his kids called, needing help, he said, "Let me think about that and get back to you." That sentence changed his life. It didn't create a fight. It didn't break their bond. But it did send a signal: I am not a default option anymore. And what he learned, slowly, is that when you stop giving automatically, you start giving intentionally. And intentional giving is where love and dignity meet. That's the first habit, pausing before you say yes. Because so often we jump in, not just because we want to help, but because we're afraid of what might happen if we don't. We fear being left out, being resented, being seen as not needed. But the truth is, every yes that costs your peace is a yes that teaches others to ignore your needs. And you don't deserve that. You deserve reciprocity, even if you've never asked for it before, even if it makes others uncomfortable at first. There's also something else that shifts when you begin to pause. You start to notice how much of your time is spent on others' needs rather than your own desires, your own rest, your own joy. Like Evelyn, who was 66 when she realized she hadn't had a single day to herself in over a year, between caring for her grandchildren, cooking weekly meals for her grown kids, and organizing every holiday. She was constantly busy but not fulfilled. She told me, "I thought I was being useful, but what I was really doing was disappearing." So she started a habit so simple, it almost felt silly. Every Tuesday morning, she blocked off 2 hours on her calendar. For herself, no appointments, no errands, no favors, just her and whatever made her feel like herself again. At first, her daughter pushed back. "You're not available Tuesday." "For what?" And Evelyn simply said, "That's my time." It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was sacred. And soon, that sacred time spilled into other areas of her life. She started speaking up more, started saying no without padding it with excuses, and slowly, her family began to adjust, not because she demanded change, but because she embodied it. These are the kinds of shifts that bring your power back, not in grand declarations, but in habits that say, "I matter too." And when those habits take root, something else begins to grow: your sense of wholeness. You stop feeling invisible. Not because the world suddenly wakes up and claps for you, but because you are no longer hiding in plain sight. You begin to take up space in your own life. You stop waiting for someone to notice you. You start noticing yourself, and that's where the real change begins. There's a kind of silence that sets in when you've spent years being the one who holds everything together, the one who remembers the birthdays, keeps the peace at the dinner table, shows up even when no one else does. At first, that role feels noble, like you're the steady one, the foundation everyone else relies on. But slowly, quietly, it starts to wear you down, not because you're tired of giving, but because you've realized you're the only one who never gets asked how you're doing. And when that silence settles, it becomes easy to doubt your place, to wonder, if I stop doing all this, will anyone even notice? But here's the truth that gets lost in all the noise of family life and expectations. Your value is not in what you do for others. It's in who you are. And if the people around you can't see that, it may be because you've never shown them what it looks like when you claim your space instead of always filling theirs. There was a woman named Diane who once told me she felt like a support beam in her family. Present, solid, essential, but never really seen. Her adult children often spoke over her. She wasn't included in big decisions. They assumed she would be fine with whatever was planned. They thanked her, occasionally, but more often, they just took, and for a long time, Diane didn't mind. She told herself, that's what mothers do. Until one day, her youngest daughter made a comment. You don't have much going on. Right, Mom? As if her life didn't even register as full or worthy anymore. That was the day Diane stopped waiting to be included, and instead, she began making herself visible again. She didn't start arguments. She didn't guilt anyone. She simply began to speak clearly, directly, and from a place of self-respect. I'd love to come, but I'll need to know in advance next time. No, I'm not available that day. I've already made other plans. At first, her children were taken aback. They weren't used to boundaries from the person who had always bent herself backward to keep everything together. But over time, those boundaries changed how they viewed her. They started asking before assuming. They started listening when she spoke. They started seeing her as a full person again, not just as a background figure. That's the second habit that brings your voice back. Speaking plainly. No padding, no apologizing, no long-winded explanations to make your no sound soft. Because a boundary isn't rude, it's clarity. And clarity invites respect. And it's not just about what you say to others, it's about what you say to yourself. There's an inner voice, often softened by years of sacrifice, that starts to grow stronger once you stop waiting to be noticed. It's the voice that says, I want to go on a trip. I'm not up for company today. I need something just for me. And when you begin honoring that voice, your life begins to reflect it. Brandon, a man in his late 60s, spent years living near his adult kids so he could be there for them. He never missed a recital or a birthday. He helped with home repairs, babysat every weekend, and rarely took time for himself. And still, he felt more like a fixture than a father, someone they appreciated, but didn't really see. So one day, after a particularly dismissive comment from his eldest son, he made a decision. He bought a small cabin 3 hours away. Nothing dramatic, just a space that belonged to him, a place where he could read, garden, and sit by the lake without always being on call. At first, his kids were confused. Why would you move so far? We need you here. But Brandon said something I'll never forget. I've been here for everyone else my whole life. Now I'm choosing to be here for myself, too. It wasn't easy. At first, he worried he'd be forgotten. But slowly, the dynamic changed. The calls became more respectful, the visits more intentional, and most importantly, Brandon began to feel grounded again, not in someone else's expectations, but in his own needs. That's the third habit that restores your balance. Making room for yourself, not when everyone else is done. Not as a reward, but as a right. It could be something as small as taking yourself out to lunch every Friday, or as big as starting a project you've put off for years. The size doesn't matter. What matters is that it belongs to you and that it doesn't require anyone's permission to begin. Because the habit of waiting to be asked, to be needed, to be appreciated can become a quiet kind of grief. But the habit of choosing yourself, that becomes a quiet kind of freedom. Freedom to take your time. Freedom to say what you mean. Freedom to let others adjust to your new pace, your new priorities, and they will adjust. Maybe not right away, maybe not perfectly. But when you begin to live with self-respect, others take notice. Even if they don't say it out loud, they begin to feel the shift in you. They see you no longer chasing connection, but embodying it, and that changes the conversation. Because when you stop filling every empty space, others have a chance to show up. When you stop making yourself small, the room expands to fit the real you. And when you stop giving from a place of depletion, you start giving from a place of abundance. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. Something begins to change, not loudly, not all at once, but in small, almost sacred ways. When you start living for yourself again, you wake up with a little more space in your chest. You move through the day without feeling like you have to explain every choice. You begin to realize that it's not selfish to rest, to say no, to have preferences. It's not rude to protect your energy. It's not dramatic to expect respect. It's simply human. And for the first time in a long time, you start to feel like one again. That's the thing people often forget about aging. It doesn't make you less. If anything, it strips away the unnecessary, the noise, the obligations you once thought defined your worth, and leaves you face to face with the quiet truth of who you really are. And when you start honoring that truth, something inside you settles. The fear of being overlooked, it softens. The ache of being taken for granted, it begins to fade. Because you're no longer waiting for others to see you, you're seeing yourself. This is where the fourth habit comes in. Stop over-explaining. When you say no, you don't have to explain why. When you decline an invitation, or decide not to host the family this year, or choose to spend the holiday quietly with yourself, you don't need a list of justifications. You don't need to talk yourself into being understood. You are allowed to make choices that nourish you, even if someone else doesn't agree. Nicole, a woman I met at a community gathering, told me she used to spiral into guilt anytime she did something her children didn't like. If she skipped a birthday party because she wasn't feeling well, she'd follow it up with 3 texts and an apology. If she declined to babysit, she'd offer to make up for it another time. But one day, she paused after sending yet another "I'm so sorry, I hope you're not mad" message, and she thought to herself, what am I apologizing for? Taking care of myself. So she stopped. The next time she said no, she just said it. Kindly, firmly, and without any explanations. The world didn't fall apart. Her kids were surprised, but they adjusted. Because when you model self-respect, you teach others how to meet you there. Not through lectures, not through guilt, but through presence, and presence true. Grounded presence leads us to the 5th habit. Maybe the most radical one of all. Allow yourself to receive. This one can be hard, especially for those of us who've spent our lives being the givers, the ones who show up, the ones who remember, the ones who smooth over every rough edge. But receiving, that asks us to believe we're worthy of care, even when we're not useful. Eric, a quiet man who once volunteered to help fix the roof at the local library, told me that after his stroke, he struggled with letting others help. His daughter offered to pick up his groceries. His neighbor offered to mow the lawn, and each time, he resisted. I didn't want to feel like a burden, he said. But one day, his daughter sat him down and said, Dad, do you think I only love you when you're helping me? He shook his head. Then why do you think I only want to help you when you've earned it? That conversation changed everything for him. He began saying, yes, not out of weakness, but out of trust. Because that's what receiving is. Trusting that love doesn't have to be earned. That you don't always have to be the strong one. That letting others care for you doesn't diminish your strength, it reveals it. And when you do that, when you begin to let in the love, something remarkable happens. You stop performing. You stop proving. You stop bending into someone else's shape just to be accepted. And you begin, finally, to belong to yourself. First and foremost, that's the quiet joy of this chapter in life. It's not about being the busiest, the most helpful, the most accommodating. It's about being the most honest with yourself, with your boundaries, with your energy. It's about choosing relationships where your no is respected just as much as your yes. It's about giving when it feels good, not when it's expected. It's about letting go of roles that no longer fit and stepping into the freedom of who you've become. You don't need to earn your place. You don't need to chase acknowledgement. You only need to trust that when you respect yourself, the people who matter will meet you there, and the ones who don't, let them fall away. Gently, without anger, without apology. Because you've outgrown the version of life where your needs come last. Now, you're building a life where they belong front and center. Not out of selfishness, but out of truth. And when you live from that truth, You stop asking the world to notice you and start noticing yourself. You stand taller, you smile easier. And even if they don't say it, they feel it. Because the energy of someone who is at peace with themselves is unmistakable. It commands respect. It invites care. It creates space for something beautiful to return. Connection, but this time, on your terms. If you've stayed with me through all of this, thank you. It means something, doesn't it? To sit with these words, to feel the truth of them settle somewhere deeper than the surface. Because sometimes the world gets so loud, so rushed, so demanding, that we forget to listen to our own voice. And if there's one thing I hope this message gave you, it's not more pressure to change, or a list of things you should do. I hope it gave you permission. Permission to pause, to breathe, to reflect, and to quietly ask yourself, what would it look like if I chose myself just a little more often? What if you didn't answer every call on the first ring? What if you didn't feel guilty for saying not this time? What if you didn't shrink your desires to keep everyone else comfortable? What if, from this point forward, you stopped waiting for someone to see how much you've given and started giving back to yourself? Because this part of your life, it's not about proving. It's not about pleasing. It's about becoming. Becoming more honest, more spacious inside, more aligned with the quiet rhythm of your own needs. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to explain joy. You don't have to apologize for protecting your peace. And if there are people in your life who don't understand this version of you, the version who sets boundaries, who pauses before saying yes, who sometimes puts the phone on silent, that's okay. They'll adjust, or they won't. But you'll stay steady either way. Because the real power, it's not in changing how others treat you. It's in changing what you allow. And when you start practicing that softly, calmly, consistently, something begins to return to you. Maybe it's your voice, maybe it's your spark. Maybe it's just the feeling that you no longer need to disappear in order to be loved. Whatever it is, it's yours now. You've earned it. And if something in this video stirred something in you, if a part of you felt less alone, more understood, or just quietly seen, I want to invite you to share your story in the comments. Have you ever felt overlooked? Even as you kept giving, have you started making changes, big or small, to reclaim your voice? What helped you? Your story might be the thing someone else needs to hear today. And if this message resonated with you, if you want more reminders like this, quiet conversations like this, I'd love for you to subscribe. Not because it helps a channel grow, but because it helps build something gentler. A space where people like you, wise, kind, generous, can feel supported without always being the supporter. A space where your voice matters, where you can come back whenever the world feels too heavy. And here, you are not invisible. You are not too much. You are not too late. You're right on time. And you're still becoming. So here's what I wish for you. From one human heart to another. May your boundaries be clear. May your days be yours. May your giving come from joy, not guilt. And may your presence quiet, calm, strong, be a reminder to everyone around you that you are not here to be ignored. You are here to be honored. And it begins with you.